Hi everyone, this is Chris Green, the History Chap, and I just want to tell you what's happened in British history in week commencing the 23rd of August. And today is slightly different. I've decided to come outside down by the canal here and just get a bit of fresh air while I'm talking to you. So this is the week, the 23rd of August, this is the week where William Wallace, aka Braveheart, was executed. He was hung, drawn and quartered. It was also the week in 1814 that the British burnt down Washington, or burnt the major buildings in Washington DC. And it was also this week, 1840, where the British gained control of Hong Kong at the Treaty of Nanking, which brought to an end the First Opium War. 25th of August 1875, Captain Matthew Webb becomes the first person to ever swim the English Channel. And on the 26th of August 1346, the Battle of Crecy, an English army under Edward III and his eldest son Edward the Black Prince inflicted a devastating defeat on the French during the 100 Years' War. English archers kill over 4,000 French troops, including 1,500 of their knights, for the loss of only about 300 on their own side. And really, alongside Poitiers and Agincourt, Crecy ranks as one of the three great English victories over the French during the Middle Ages. But the event I want to talk about this week is the 23rd of August, 1914, the Battle of Mons. The Battle of Mons was the first major action of the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, on the Western Front during the First World War. It occurred on the 23rd of August, less than 3 weeks after Britain had declared war on Germany. The 80,000 men of the BEF were outnumbered 3-1 by the advancing German First Army in Belgium, and they took up a defensive line on the canal outside Mons, just inside Belgium, from across the border from France, a little way across the border. And the men from regiments across the British Isles held a line for the whole of the 23rd of August against that overwhelming German numbers. We had the Royal Irish Dragoons, cavalry, who performed the first British cavalry charge of the war, and from whom Edward Thomas is credited with firing the very first British shots on the Western Front. Not the first shots by a British soldier in the First World War. That actually belongs to a man from modern-day Ghana, who fired the first shots in a campaign that started in West Africa against the German colonies there. Also from the Emerald Isle, the Irish Fusiliers were in action at Mons. From Scotland, we had the Gordon Highlanders and the King's Own Scottish Borderers. And from England, we had the West Kents and the Middlesex Regiment, who lost 15 of their officers and 353 other ranks killed or wounded on that one day at the beginning of World War I. And we also had the Royal Fusiliers, from whom Lieutenant Maurice Dees and Private Sidney Godley won the first Victoria Crosses of the First World War. As the Germans advanced, they were met by a hail of artillery, machine gun fire and rifle fire. The British might have had a very small army. 80,000 was the British army. Basically, the Germans and the French each had like 1 million men under arms. The British were all professional troops, and they'd been taught to fire their Lee Enfield rifles at a rate of about 15 shots a minute. And it was estimated that in the Battle of Mons, the BEF actually inflicted nearly 5,000 casualties on the Germans that day, for a loss of about 1,600 of their own men killed or wounded. In fact, the firepower was so rapid from those Lee Enfield rifles that Germans actually thought they were being fired upon by machine guns. Amazing firepower of the British. But due to the overwhelming German numbers, they just kept coming and coming, and the fact that the French withdrew on the right, the BEF had to rapidly withdraw themselves, otherwise they'd get cut off. And desperate rearguard actions were fought by the Duke of Wellington's regiment and the Cheshire Regiment that allowed the BEF to avoid being encircled or indeed bulldozed out of the way by the German First Army. Indeed, the 1st Battalion of the Cheshire Regiment lost 80% of their men in that rearguard action, and the British commander, General Smith-Dorrien, stated that they and the Duke of Wellington's actions saved the BEF from complete destruction. The retreat from Mons continued for 250 miles in nearly 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later they'd almost been pushed back to Paris. And it was there that the British and the French turned and counterattacked at the Battle of the Marne, and the stalemate that really became the First World War on the Western Front started. But there's another story that came out of the Battle of Mons, which you may or may not have heard of. It's a legend or a myth, and it's about the Angels of Mons. Because shortly after the battle, a story started to circulate that as the BEF started that retreat, that desperate retreat on the night of the 23rd, a ghostly army appeared between them and the Germans. Now, some said it was longbowmen from Agincourt, commanded by St. George himself, standing there, and others said it was an army of winged angels protecting the British Tommies. Either way, the legend of the Angels of Mons was born, and it's been retold many times since then. Unfortunately, there is no evidence or eyewitness accounts of any angels or ghostly armies. What there is a written story by Arthur Machin in the Evening News, which at the time was London's most popular evening tabloid paper. Machin wrote this story in the first person, and the paper didn't specifically say it was fictional. And so many took this story that Machin wrote of this ghostly army, and they took it as factual. It had happened, and suddenly this myth grew at life of its own. Parish magazines in England started to reprint the story, and Machin's story of the longbowmen, the bowmen, suddenly took on a life of its own and went completely out of control, to the extent that Machin actually wrote to one of the priests and told him that this was just a story. And the clergyman wrote back and told him that he was wrong. He'd read it and it was factual. Now, whether aided by a heavenly army or not, and I'm open to the belief that people have spiritual experiences in battle. The BEF were nevertheless able to safely withdraw. And having stalled that German advance at Mons and protected the French left, they had done their job. And the British army, which the German Kaiser Wilhelm had referred to as this contemptible little army, had given the German army a bloody nose, and the BEF, in true ironic British humour, turned the Kaiser's scorn on its head and nicknamed themselves the Old Contemptibles. So there you go, that's a little bit about the first battle that the British fought in the First World War on the Western Front, and a few other snippets from British history this week as well. Finally, speaking of commemorating events, a year ago I delivered my very first online history talk. And it was all about, some of you might remember it, was all about the brave inhabitants of the village of Eyam in Derbyshire in England. Back in 1666, there was an outbreak. England suffered its last outbreak of the plague, the bubonic plague. And when the plague arrived in this village of Eyam in the centre of England, the inhabitants did something unique and brave and selfless. They refused to run and spread the plague. They stayed put in their village. They went into a quarantine, and their actions stopped the plague in its tracks. You know, some people say to me, what's the point of history? Well, I think we learn from it. History gives us inspiring messages from the past that have an absolute relevance for us and a message for us today. So watch it today by signing up at thehistorychap.com. Those of you on my mailing list, don't bother going over there because it's in your emails. I sent you one on Friday, and the link is also in the email that I've sent you with this video today. But for anybody else, join me on this journey through British history at thehistorychap.com. And in the meantime, take care, and I'll see you very soon.